2 years after the release of the 5th Harry Potter film, and the final book for that matter, Half-Blood Prince received its film adaptation. This video will closely analyse the differences between the two mediums and include a critique of both film and novel with a summary of my thoughts at the end. The 6th round of novel butchering commenced with the return of Steve Kloves writing the screenplay and would continue to do so until the end of the film series. The composer, director, editor and cast remained pretty much the same except for the introduction of Jim Broadbent as Slughorn. I spoke quite positively of the previous Harry Potter film, and if there isn't much change going on, what could possibly go wrong? Well, you'll just have to keep watching, won't you? I'd give a spoiler warning, but I mean, this story's been around for at least a decade now. I would find it very odd if you clicked on this video without knowing what happens in this particular story, but who am I to judge? Without further ado, let's dive headfirst into this review of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. The first minute of the film contains quite a unique sequence that doesn't take place in the book. This segment of Harry being photographed by the paparazzi mob at the Ministry is certainly interesting to watch, in that these people really couldn't care less for how broken he must be in this moment and continue to flash bright lights in his face for the next newspaper headline. The flashes tie into the explosive wand battles he just encountered, possibly traumatizing him even further. We then jump to a visually impressive sequence of some Death Eaters being a nuisance. It boggles my mind, however, that a storm brewing outside was able to stop a business meeting going on here, yet everyone else on the ground seems completely unaware of what's going on above them. Even more bizarrely, people actually start disappearing as the bridge gets destroyed. Then we're in a tube station cafe where we see that old tosser Harry Potter. Before we get onto that though, the book begins entirely differently to what we've seen, and the bridge collapsing is only briefly mentioned. It begins with a fictional Prime Minister of the UK receiving several visits from Fudge. Through the use of a talking portrait that is immovable from the Minister's office, Fudge visits the Prime Minister, who dislikes these visits due to being treated like a naive child every time and having little to no warning of when somebody might crash through his fireplace. Fudge once visited him to explain that Sirius Black had escaped Azkaban, which is the reason why it was publicly broadcasted and seen on the TV in the third novel. Fudge this time visits to warn him that Voldemort is back and his gang are wreaking havoc across the country, such as Dementors roaming wild and giant attacks. Fudge then explains that he resigned due to the demands of the wizarding world, and the new Minister for Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, appears for the first time in the story to have his turn at what Fudge had been doing for a number of years. Harry's first moments in the book are where you would genuinely expect him to be, at Privet Drive, waiting for Dumbledore to collect him. The film, however, seems to have plopped him into a random cafe to establish he's a bit better at the dating scene now that he's become a bit more famous. Why is he here? I haven't the foggiest.
I like riding around on trains. Takes my mind off things.
Yeah, and reading the Daily Prophet takes your mind off things too, does it? Are you kidding me? Fortunately, the book gives a much more detailed account of recent events by showing us the headlines of some newspapers Harry keeps in his messy room. They explain to us that Scrimgeour is a people-approved improvement from Fudge due to his policy on protecting the students of Hogwarts over the coming months by teaching them counter-curses and getting a crew of Aurors to defend the castle. Dumbledore then arrives with a rather humorous section where the Dursleys are speechless at who has just turned up on their doorstep. Harry and Dumbledore begin their conversation in the living room, and when Vernon tries to intervene, Dumbledore flicks his wand and sends a sofa crashing into him and his family. He then moves the sofa back into place and conjures some mead and glasses out of thin air, 5 in total, meaning 1 for each person in the house, which nag at the Dursleys' heads as the other 2 enjoy their drink. They discuss Sirius's will, which states Harry inherits everything he ever possessed, including 12 Grimmauld Place and Buckbeak. According to Black family tradition, however, the house will not pass down to Harry because the house should be inherited by the next Black in the family, which is Bellatrix Lestrange. Harry becomes quite upset by this, saying he doesn't want the house and the Order can have it. Dumbledore then explains there are enchantments on the house because of said tradition, preventing them from using it as headquarters. Because of the inheritance, Harry also legally possesses Kreacher, who Dumbledore summons into the Dursley household. Kreacher then gets very agitated at the prospect of being owned by Harry Potter and not his beloved Bellatrix, but is ordered by Harry to work in the kitchens at Hogwarts. Later on, Harry instructs him and Dobby to tail Draco Malfoy at school. Harry also sees fit to pass the ownership of Buckbeak onto Hagrid under the name Witherwings, seeing as the Ministry wanted the hippogriff named Buckbeak dead 3 years prior. Slughorn's introduction is very telling of his character from the moment he's revealed. There is also a darkness to him, being a Slytherin and all, but also has a strangely comforting personality, shown through him transforming into an armchair of all things. Jim Broadbent's performance in this film is excellent, and I don't think I can imagine another actor fitting the role quite like he did. The character is also excellently written because of his obsessive collecting of individuals. individuals. The way he describes having Sirius would have completed his set of the Black family tells all. Of course, the reason why he's in the house in the first place isn't explained until later, but this section is a magnificent way of introducing his character. Compared to Dumbledore's actions in the book, he comes out as a bit of a prick in the film. Firstly, he cockblocks Harry from ever seeing that girl again, and then he suddenly tells him, "Don't worry, I've already shoved your gear from your room whilst we were here. Never mind about any plans you might have. It's okay, you can trust me." To top it all off, he just drops Harry in a puddle instead of seeing him to the door like any sane and rational human being would. Then begins what I would say is one of the weaker elements of the film. The romance. We'll go into more specifics as we go along, but Harry gives Ginny an awkward glance. Woo, they're in love now. And Ron wipes some toothpaste from Hermione's mouth. Saucy. There's a nice visual metaphor of the Malfoy family name potentially being burned out of existence because of Lucius's arrest right here, but these guys laugh for an unnatural length of time about Dumbledore's age for some reason. More to the point, the only things that are established is that Harry's at the Weasleys, some people might get it on later in the film, and the school might not be safe. In the book, Harry arrives and sees the clock we saw in the second movie, except all the family members are assigned to the mortal peril part of it, adding to the doom and gloom atmosphere creeping on them all. The Weasleys and Hermione don't see Harry until the morning after, where Fleur de la Claire makes an appearance, bringing up breakfast to him and announces she's going to marry Bill Weasley, much to the family's displeasure. Ginny refers to her as Phlegm, and they each describe how irritating she has been over the summer. Ginny then imitates Fleur's femininity, displaying her boyish character from the first time we see her in this particular novel. The characters also get the results from their OWL exams they took last year, all succeeding in going on to Newt level studies. Jumping to Spinner's End, I do quite like this section, even though it's a little basic. Once again, we're subjected to the more mature actors doing their job excellently as always, but I think it's the fact that Snape has fallen from grace since the Dark Lord's first defeat that makes this scene so good. He is regarded as a coward and a traitor to the cause, due to his allegiance being a somewhat grey area for everyone since the beginning of the story. Rickman reacts to how Bellatrix expresses these ideas excellently, and understands how to tread on the eggshells of evil because he's been doing it since the end of the First Wizarding War. I'd love to compliment this section in Fred and George's newly opened shop, but I simply can't bring myself to do so. It's more spectacle than anything, purely as a distraction from the massive, gaping plot hole that is this shop's existence. How would Fred and George be able to open a shop like this without significant investment, considering they were born into one of the poorest families in the wizarding world? Hey Steve, remember all that money they made from gambling and Harry's donations in the fourth book that you completely forgot to mention? Speaking of the book, Hagrid accompanies them through Diagon Alley, serving as their protector as they shop for the shit they need that year. The trio go into Madame Malkin's for some new clothes, only to encounter Malfoy and his mother being uptight and upset at the poor quality of service they are receiving. The two teams then throw threats and insults at each other before Mummy and Bunny leave and go to Borgin and Burke's. I do like this contrast of the bright orange shop against the greyish brown of the rest of the alley in this shot here, showing the rest of the business as slowly dying off because of the danger that lurks around them. This tint of the film is seen pretty much throughout it though, and I'm not really sure if it's a lazy excuse for a tonal shift, because it really is quite excessive. It works in scenes like Spinner's End, the cave, and when Dumbledore dies, but look at this in the train and compare it to that of the first film. Yes, time changes perspective, but this is just insane. Alfonso Cuarón could be to blame for this, but I think his use of contrast between light and dark brought out the best elements of the story. Here, it just feels so muggy and lifeless as a substitute for the events that are happening in the background of the story that the writer mysteriously forgot about. A lot more happens on the train in the book, not to mention that Harry hangs out with Neville and Luna instead because of Ron and Hermione being prefects. This was odd to read because when Harry receives his OWL results, he is also anointed as the Quidditch captain for Gryffindor, which Hermione states he is now on equal status with the prefects. I guess that idea got thrown out a few chapters later. Slughorn also holds his first event of the Slug Club within a compartment of the train, where Harry, Neville, McLaggen, Blaise, Ginny, and some other character that is of little importance to the story are invited to join Slughorn for some food and natter. I know this is a little unrelated, but I was watching through Philosopher's Stone again the other week and I noticed something really strange when they get off the train. Hagrid barks. Just watch this clip and you'll hear it. And you'll never unhear it again.
Right then, first years, this way please. Come on now, first years, don't be shy. Come on now, hurry up. On.
Anyways, back on topic, it's actually not Luna who saves Harry on the train in the book, but Tonks, she being one of the Aurors who are tasked with protecting the school. She takes him up to the gate and Snape then takes him from there to the castle, taunting him all the way there for being a latecomer and not knowing what Draco had done to him. In the film, we have this rather strange sequence where Professor Flitwick greets them at the gate, asking for their names. If they were the last 2 students on the train, they would be the only 2 not ticked off the fucking list! If you were searching for them as well, surely you would know the identities of the 2 individuals you were looking for, you fucking idiot!
Will you stop eating?
But Mom, when I get sad I eat, and when I eat I get fat, and when I get fat I get sad again. I just can't win. There's no mention in the book of the scene that follows with Ron and Harry guiding students in the wrong direction. I mean, just look at his face, this isn't right. The only purpose of this is to get both of them into potions class so Harry can acquire the Half-Blood Prince's textbook. Harry mentions about not getting a high enough grade to get into potions, making me wonder if all the classes have acceptance tiers too. The question I therefore pose is this: what happens to all the students who didn't pass? Or those that barely scraped passes in certain classes? Are you just turned around at 15 or 16 by your head of house saying, "Nope, sorry, you weren't meant to come to Hogwarts this year because you're too shit"? Speaking of unattended classes, why is it that potions class is the only one given the light of day in this film? Okay, I'll grant them that there are very few of the other classes in the book either, but there's actually a segment of the book detailing what an official Defense Against the Dark Arts class with Snape is like, and it ain't pretty. Like in Prisoner of Azkaban, he treats the students like shit, but this time we have a hands-on approach to the subject instead of theory. The classroom is redecorated with paintings of people suffering in pain and is lit entirely by candlelight. Without any prior training, Snape commands the class to cast non-verbal spells at each other in complete silence. Because everybody bar Hermione is doing a bad job, Snape comes along to replace Ron temporarily in this little group that he and Harry are in to show them how it's done, and casts a spell at Harry that he instinctively deflects but says the name of the spell, landing him in detention with Snape on the coming Saturday evening when his first private lesson with Dumbledore is. This first lesson with Snape is quite important for the plot in my opinion because it explains how non-verbal spells are incorporated into the story. We see examples of them in the previous film, and irritatingly, it is never explained how the witches and wizards are able to perform them in the films. The same could be said for the privately tutored apparating lessons, which was also missing from the film, seeing as none of them are seen doing it in the previous films and yet somehow know how to do it in the Deathly Hallows films. The horny teenage girls get all fixated on the love potion for some reason, and then the potion making begins. I cannot believe for a moment that the highest level of wizarding education for potion textbooks are incorrect on so many levels. More importantly, you would have thought that in all the time Snape was in charge that such mistakes would be rectified, seeing as he was the one who corrected all of them in the first place. I understand Snape is also a dick, and that these potions are supposed to be difficult to master, but how is anybody supposed to learn how to make the best of the best potions if nobody is taught how to make them properly? One piece of credit I will give to this segment, however, is the music. It sounds very similar to Professor Umbridge's theme used in the previous film, that devilish and bouncy melody that just brings a smile to my face. I honestly don't think Mr. Hooper gets enough credit for tracks like this. They really are fantastic for these montage sequences we see in the 5th and 6th films. Harry's first private session with Dumbledore opens with him popping 2 of the destroyed Horcruxes into a drawer. Dumbledore pointlessly tries to pry out Harry's romantic interests again for some reason, and then we start hopping back in time. There are quite a few memories and interesting little details that aren't mentioned in the film that I thought I'd bring to your attention before we pry apart the rest of this movie. The first memory we see is that of Bob Ogden, an ex-employee of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He visits a man called Marvolo Gaunt, Voldemort's grandfather, and his 2 children, Merope and Morphin, all of which are a bit messed up in the head and are Voldemort's mother and uncle, respectively. Morphin is being summoned by the Ministry to answer for the crime of attacking the Muggle Tom Riddle Sr. Marvolo supports the actions of his son and a fight ensues, leaving Morphin and Marvolo thrown into Azkaban. Later on, Dumbledore explains his suspicions that Merope used love potion on an unsuspecting Tom Riddle Sr., leading to her being impregnated without any real love on the father's side. This, by myself and several others, is speculated to be the reason why Voldemort is the the way he is, being a child born of love potion, a deceptive method of reproduction if I do say so myself. It's a tragic shame this segment wasn't included because it really delves into the roots of Voldemort's past even before he was born. In the second memory that we do indeed see in the film, Dumbledore speaks in greater detail with the head matron of the orphanage, where she talks about some of the horrific things Tom did to other students, such as hanging a child's rabbit from the orphanage rafters and taking 2 children to the cave we see at the end of the film to terrorise them. There is a deleted scene where Dumbledore does explain this to the audience and that the children came back damaged, but that's about the only detail about the cave's significance with relation to the character we get. I find it interesting that in the film, Harry acts as spectator in the memories and doesn't enter any of them himself, unlike the first time he encounters the Pensieve in Goblet of Fire. I presume this was to put more focus on Riddle and the conversation between himself and Dumbledore, which I don't really blame them for because this scene is pretty great. I don't know if it's down to the post-colour tone or the fact this child is very twisted and gets quite excited about the fact his wardrobe's on fire. Either way, it's shot excellently and gets a big fat thumbs up from me. Oddly enough, the guy who plays Cormac does a good job of being the dickhead jock, and whenever I see him, like Hermione, I am filled with revulsion. It's quite surprising it took the producers this long into the series to create such a character, all things considered, but then again, we aren't watching your typical American high school drama here, and we don't understand the characters based on what social categories they fall under, but instead more on the individual traits they have within the story. Just before going to the 3 broomsticks, in the book, Mundungus Fletcher appears in Hogsmeade carrying a sack full of belongings from the Black House that he had stolen and was ready to sell in his arms. Harry pins him to the wall by the throat, but Tonks comes along in the nick of time to stop Harry choking him, followed by Mundungus disapparating, and the 3 then advance to the 3 broomsticks. Something that is also inherently different at this particular point in the novel is that Harry doesn't actively seek friendship or relations with Slughorn due to his awkward encounter with him on the train. In fact, if anything, he avoids him because he is constantly invited to dinner parties that he often has convenient excuses for why he can't attend them, such as Dumbledore's private lessons and Quidditch practices that he deliberately books on the time and date when Slughorn holds one of these events. Once again, however, the film decides to perform another romantic gesture from Ron that is almost entirely identical to the toothpaste debacle we saw earlier. This time, however, Hermione gets really upset for some reason. They leave, and I told you fuckers there's underage drinking going on here. Hagrid comes along to save the day, and my god, he is underplayed in the film. As mentioned earlier, he isn't anywhere to be seen in Diagon Alley, and most notably in the novel, he is upset because none of his favourite students are taking care of magical creatures this term. In fact, I think it's implied that nobody took the subject at all. He doesn't show up to meals and ignores the trio until they visit him, where he explains that Aragog isn't doing so well. Like in the 3 broomsticks and in the dormitory, Ron's very weird obsession with Ginny's boyfriend begins to become apparent. Personally, I would never understand why a sibling would want to interfere with another's relationship, but Ron's comments are just outright creepy. The book takes this to another level with a segment depicting Harry and Ron encountering Dean and Ginny kissing behind a tapestry. Harry's internal monologue tells us of having an inner rage building when he sees Dean with her, which I think is probably the first time the romantic interest thing is even brought up in the book. Ron gets all angry at Ginny, saying that he doesn't want to see his sister kissing in public, as if that's something to upset the family name or something, when she returns the argument with him just being jealous that he's not snogging anybody. Harry tries convincing himself afterwards that his feelings are aligned with Ron's, but eventually comes to the conclusion that he's in love with her. Cormac then becomes even more gross when he describes how he's going to go hunting with the Minister for Magic during the holidays. There's some great anecdotes in this scene too that I find quite entertaining. Fat Piggy and his alcoholic father was a funny tale, and Hermione's little story about her parents being dentists is just adorable. It would have been even better had she gone on to explain what exactly dentists do, followed by horrific reactions from the rest of the table, but I think the story of her father being bitten does the job suitably nonetheless. Things start getting a bit weird though when Ginny comes into the room and Harry just stands up for no reason. The music does play to this scene's advantage though. It's another one of those silly, bouncy tunes that adeptly describes these bunch of weirdos. The next day, Ron has a little mental breakdown about playing Quidditch. I think it's great we didn't need any verbal cues to describe Ron's nerves in this scene because of this part here, where a deep thudding can be heard. It is only to be revealed that a bunch of Gryffindors are actually throwing a ball around, but the intensity of the thudding is heightened to the extent that his surroundings are clearly troubling him. It all kind of grinds to a halt though when Crabbe says,
"What's he wearing?"
So how was it then?
How was what?
Your dinner party?
Pretty boring, actually. Though I think Harry enjoyed dessert.
She's sitting right there, Hermione! The Quidditch match isn't really that noteworthy. It doesn't hold up to the previous ones because of the focus being entirely on Ron. This doesn't hurt too much though, purely because of what follows. The little scene with Harry and Hermione is quite touching. It's interesting that she tries to hide her emotions behind this intellectual veil that she has, but this time it all pours out because of her attraction to Ron. This isn't the first time either that Ron's gotten a bit overexcited about newfound popularity, and Hermione's distress is certainly felt when she throws those birds at him. It would have been more interesting had both of them gone a little further with their emotions, but beggars can't be choosers, eh? Fudge then explains that he resigned due to the demands of the wizarding world. Wizarding. Dumbledore then arrives with a rather humorous section where the Dumbledores... To top it all off, oh my god. Great England. Rickman reacts to how Bellatrix expresses these ideas excellently and understands how to tread on the eggshells of evil because he's doing it fuck-a-doodle-doo. Considering they were born into one of the most poor families in the wizarding world. I did not say that correctly. Speaking of the book, Harry's pressed 5 at lesson. Oh my god, I did it again. Dumbledore speaks in greater detail with the head matron of the orphanage, where she talks about some horrific things he did to other students. Tom did to other students. Otherwise, that doesn't make much sense. In the second memory that we do but that's about the only detail about the cave's significance with It's quite surprising. It's quite surprising it took the But then again, we aren't watching your typical American high school drama here, and we don't understand the characters based on what social characters... This sentence is cancer.